Let me tell you a story about my barn. It's not just any barn, it's my asterisk barn. It sits on 5 acres of land that came with the house I worked so hard to buy. The barn isn't fancy. Its wooden walls are weathered, and the door creaks when you open it. But it's special to me because it's mine. Or at least it was supposed to be mine until Karen decided otherwise. Karen is what you might call a force of nature. She's the kind of person who always seems to have her life together, or at least pretends to. Her hair is always perfectly styled. Her clothes look like they're fresh off a fashion runway, and she carries around a clipboard like it's an extension of her arm. Oh, and did I mention, she runs the Homeowners Association, HOA, in our neighborhood. That means she's basically the queen bee, ruling over everyone with rules, regulations, and more than a little bit of attitude. I didn't think much of Karen when we first moved in. Sure, she seemed a little intense, but I figured she was harmless. Boy, was I wrong. One sunny afternoon, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, there she was, Karen, standing on my porch with her megawatt smile and clipboard in hand. "Hi there," she said cheerfully. Before I could even say hello back, she launched into her pitch. "We've been looking for the perfect venue for this year's community dance party, and your barn would be absolutely ideal." I blinked at her, confused. "My barn," I repeated, thinking I must have misheard her. "Yes," she exclaimed, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "It has such charm, doesn't it? Rustic yet elegant. We'll take care of everything. Decorations, catering, cleanup. You won't have to lift a finger. All we need is access." I stood there, frozen, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to laugh. Did she really think I'd let strangers throw a party in my private property? But another part of me hesitated. Karen had a way of making people feel like saying no wasn't an option. So instead of outright refusing, I mumbled something vague about needing to check my schedule and closed the door. That should have been the end of it, right? Wrong. Over the next few weeks, Karen bombarded me with messages, emails, texts, even handwritten notes slipped under my door, all of them dripping with fake sweetness, but laced with thinly veiled threats. "Just imagine how lovely it will be." One message read. Another hinted that refusing could violate some obscure HOA rule about community participation. Every day, the pressure mounted. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that eventually she'd give up. But deep down, I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to take no for an answer. And sure enough, one evening, I looked out my window to see a group of people unloading decorations near my barn. Fairy lights, balloons, tables, it was all happening without my permission. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a barn anymore. It was about control, about standing up for myself and drawing a line. Because if I didn't, Karen would walk all over me. And maybe everyone else in the neighborhood too. The closer the date of the dance party got, the more my stress level skyrocketed. Karen was relentless. Every interaction with her felt like being caught in a spider's web, sticky, suffocating, and impossible to escape. She'd stop by unannounced, always armed with that clipboard and an unnervingly wide smile. "Just checking in," she'd chirp, as though casually dropping by to see how I was doing. But we both knew why she was there, to make sure I wasn't going to back out. One afternoon, she appeared at my door holding what looked like blueprints. "Blueprints for my barn "I thought you'd want to see the layout," she said, spreading them across my kitchen table without asking. There were diagrams showing where the DJ booth would go, where tables would be placed, even where people would line up for drinks. It was all so detailed, so precise, that it made me feel like my barn had already been hijacked, even though the event was still weeks away. "Karen," I started, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm really not sure about this." Her head snapped up, her smile faltering for just a second before snapping back into place. "Oh, don't worry," she said breezily. "You're going to love it. Everyone will. This is going to bring the neighborhood together." "That's great," I replied, forcing a tight smile of my own. "But I don't think my barn is the right spot for something like this." She tilted her head, studying me the way a cat might study a mouse before pouncing. "You know," she said slowly, Article 4.7 of the HOA guidelines encourages residents to contribute to community events. It's part of keeping property values up. It was the first time she directly referenced the rules, and I could tell it wasn't accidental. She wasn't just asking anymore. She was warning me. If I didn't comply, there would be consequences. Fines, letters, maybe even threats to take legal action. The weight of it all pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. When Karen finally left, I sank onto the couch, feeling defeated. Ryan walked in a few minutes later, took one look at my face and sighed. "Still about the barn?" he asked. I nodded glumly. "She won't let it go." He shrugged, clearly not understanding why I was making such a big deal out of it. "Why does it matter? Just let them use it. What's the worst that could happen?" That question haunted me over the next few days. What asterisk was asterisk the worst that could happen? Would they trash the place? Leave behind stains or broken equipment? Or was it bigger than that? Was giving in to Karen the first step toward losing control of everything? As the day of the party approached, I tried to prepare myself. I told myself it was just one night, and then it would be over. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about a dance party. It was about power, about who got to decide what happened on my land, in my space. On the morning of the event, I woke up early, hoping to avoid the chaos. But when I peeked outside, the transformation was already underway. Trucks pulled up, unloading speakers, lights, and crates of decorations. People buzzed around like worker bees, turning my quiet, humble barn into something unrecognizable. Strings of fairy lights zigzagged across the ceiling. Glittery banners hung from the rafters. A massive disco ball dangled precariously from the center beam. My stomach churned as I watched it all unfold. By evening, the party was in full swing. Music thumped through the walls, shaking the very foundation of the house. Laughter and chatter spilled out onto the lawn, mingling with the smell of barbecue and spilled drinks. From my window, I saw Karen strutting around like she owned the place, which, in a way, she kind of did. Her laugh rang out louder than anyone else's, sharp and piercing, cutting through the noise like a knife. I wanted to scream. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and retreated to the living room, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Maybe if I ignored it long enough, it would all just disappear. But as the hours dragged on, and the music grew louder, I realized something. Ignoring it wasn't going to fix anything. If I didn't do something soon, Karen, and everyone else, would think they could walk all over me anytime they wanted. And that's when the idea hit me. The idea came to me in a flash, like a bolt of lightning on a stormy night. At first, I wasn't sure if it was brilliant or completely insane. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. This wasn't just about my barn anymore. It was about sending a message. A message that said, you can't just take what isn't yours and expect no consequences. I glanced at the clock. It was 11:45 p.m. The party had been raging for hours, and there was no sign of it slowing down. Through the window, I could see people still dancing under the disco ball, their movements illuminated by the pulsing lights. Karen stood near the center of it all, holding court like some kind of self-appointed queen. Her laugh echoed through the air, loud and grating, as though she owned not just the barn but the entire neighborhood. Quietly, I slipped on my shoes and grabbed the spare key to the barn from its hiding spot in the kitchen drawer. My hands trembled slightly as I stepped outside into the cool night air. The music vibrated beneath my feet, making it hard to think straight. But I forced myself to focus. This was my moment. As I crept toward the barn, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: the chaos spilling beyond the doors. Empty cups littered the ground. Napkins fluttered in the breeze like tiny white flags of surrender. Someone had knocked over a chair, leaving it lying sideways in the grass. The scene was messy, chaotic, and completely out of control, just like Karen herself. When I reached the barn doors, I hesitated for a split second. What if this backfired? What if locking them inside caused some kind of panic? But then I reminded myself why I was doing this. They had invaded my space without permission, trampling over my boundaries like they didn't matter. Well, now it was time for them to learn that actions have consequences. At exactly midnight, I turned the key in the lock. The satisfying click echoed softly in the night, almost drowned out by the thumping bass from inside. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then came the banging. Doors rattled as fists pounded against the wood. Voices rose in confusion and anger. "What's going on?" Someone shouted. "Why are the doors locked?" Through a small window in the barn door, I caught a glimpse of the scene inside. People milled around, looking confused and frustrated. Some tried to push open the doors. Others checked their phones, likely realizing too late that they had no cell service in the barn. And then there was Karen. She pushed her way to the front, her face red with rage. "Who did this?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Open these doors immediately." I crossed my arms and leaned casually against the wall, watching her squirm. "Oh, I don't think so," I called back, letting a hint of satisfaction creep into my tone. "Not until you promise never to set foot in my barn again." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you serious right now? You can't keep us in here." "Watch me," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. For a few seconds, she stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Then her expression shifted from shock to fury. "This is illegal," she spat. "You're violating HOA rules." I couldn't help but laugh. "Funny coming from you," I shot back. "Since when do you care about following rules?" That shut her up for about 2 seconds. Behind her, the crowd grew restless. Someone tripped over a speaker wire, sending a ripple of groans through the group. Another person accidentally knocked over a table, scattering glittery decorations across the floor. The once glamorous party was devolving into pure chaos. Karen whirled around, trying to regain control of the situation. "Everyone stay calm," she ordered, but her voice lacked its usual authority. No one listened. Instead, they started shouting questions and complaints, turning on each other in their frustration. Standing there, watching the disaster unfold, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also a pang of guilt. These were my neighbors, after all. People I saw every day at the mailbox or in passing on morning walks. Was I being unreasonable? Had I gone too far? But then I remembered how Karen had treated me. How she'd ignored my protests, dismissed my concerns, and acted like my property belonged to her. This wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for myself. About showing her, and everyone else, that I wouldn't be pushed around anymore. "Fine," Karen snapped, spinning back to face me. "We'll leave. Just unlock the doors already." I raised an eyebrow. "Promise?" "Yes, fine. Whatever. Just let us out." I hesitated for a moment longer, savoring the sight of her squirming. Then, with a dramatic flourish, I unlocked the doors and stepped aside. One by one, the guests poured out, muttering under their breath and casting dirty looks in my direction. Karen stormed past me without another word, her clipboard clutched tightly to her chest like a shield. As the last person disappeared into the night, I closed the barn doors behind them and slid the key back into my pocket. The music had stopped, the lights had dimmed, and for the first time in hours, silence filled the air. It was over. The morning after the barn incident felt surreal, like waking up from a dream that was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. I half expected to step outside and find the neighborhood in shambles. Windows smashed, tires slashed, or worse, Karen camped out on my lawn with a megaphone. But when I opened the front door, everything seemed eerily normal. Too normal. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and the only evidence of last night's chaos was the trail of glitter still clinging stubbornly to the grass. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. Karen wasn't the type to let things slide. Not something as public or humiliating as being locked in a barn while her precious party fell apart. Sure enough, by mid-morning, the first email arrived. It was short, formal, and dripping with passive aggression. Dear neighbor, please be advised that your actions last evening may constitute a violation of HOA guidelines regarding community harmony. Further discussion is required. I stared at the screen for a long moment before deleting it without responding. Another email came an hour later, this one ching the entire HOA board. Then another and another, each one escalating in tone until they bordered on absurd. One even accused me of endangering lives by locking people inside. A claim so ridiculous it made me laugh out loud. Dangerous. Really? They were dancing, not trapped in a burning building. But the emails weren't the worst part. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, as it always does in places where everyone knows everyone else's business. Some neighbors avoided eye contact when I passed them on the street. Others gave me tight-lipped smiles, clearly unsure whether to applaud me or scold me. A few, however, surprised me. Mrs. Puttle from down the road stopped me one afternoon while I was watering the plants. "Good for you," she whispered conspiratorially. That woman needed someone to stand up to her. Her words caught me off guard. For the first time, I wondered if maybe I hadn't acted entirely alone. Maybe there were others who felt the same way but didn't have the courage or the opportunity to push back against Karen's iron grip. The thought gave me a strange sense of hope, even as the backlash continued to grow. Karen herself remained eerily quiet for a few days. No knocks on my door, no clipboard ambushes, no dramatic confrontations. At first, I thought she might be plotting her next move, but then I noticed something odd. She seemed smaller somehow, less imposing. When I saw her at the community mailbox, she avoided meeting my eyes and muttered a quick hello before hurrying away. It was almost comical, watching someone who had once strutted around like she owned the place suddenly act like a kid caught sneaking cookies from the jar. Ryan, meanwhile, oscillated between amusement and mild concern. "You sure you want to poke the bear?" he asked one evening over dinner. "She's not going to let this go quietly." "I know," I admitted, twirling spaghetti around my fork. "But what's she going to do? Fine me? Chew me? Honestly, at this point, I don't care. Let her try." And try she did. The real showdown came during the next HOA meeting, which Karen called an emergency session to address recent disturbances. When Ryan and I walked into the community center, the room buzzed with tension. Neighbors sat stiffly in their chairs, exchanging nervous glances. Karen stood at the front, her usual polished demeanor replaced by barely contained fury. Her clipboard looked like it might snap under the pressure of her clenched fingers. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and faced the crowd. I didn't yell or lose my temper. Instead, I calmly laid out everything. How Karen had ignored my objections, how she'd turned my property into her personal playground, how I'd simply reached my limit. By the time I finished, even some of her staunchest supporters were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Karen tried to defend herself, of course, but her arguments sounded hollow. "This is about community," she insisted, her voice rising. "About bringing people together." "No," I said firmly. "It's about respect. About treating people's property and their wishes with dignity. Something you forgot to do." The room fell silent. For the first time, Karen had nothing to say. And in that silence, I realized something important. Standing up for yourself isn't just about winning battles. It's about changing the narrative. The aftermath of the HOA meeting felt like the calm before another storm. Karen had stormed out halfway through, her clipboard clutched tightly to her chest, muttering something about ungrateful neighbors. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs as people exchanged glances, some nervous, others relieved, and a few downright gleeful. I could feel the shift in the air. For years, Karen had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist, but now cracks were starting to show in her carefully constructed facade. Over the next few days, whispers spread faster than wildfire. People who had once tiptoed around Karen suddenly found their voices. Mrs. Patel wasn't the only one secretly cheering for me. Others began sharing stories of how Karen had bullied them into compliance over the years. One neighbor confessed she'd been fined for planting sunflowers that were too tall, even though they barely grazed the height limit set by the HOA guidelines. Another admitted Karen had threatened to report him to the board when he painted his mailbox blue instead of beige. It seemed everyone had a story, and none of them were flattering. But not everyone was on my side. Some neighbors still sided with Karen, accusing me of causing unnecessary drama or being difficult. A few even suggested I should apologize and let the whole thing blow over. "It's just a barn party," one man said stiffly at the grocery store. "Why make such a big deal out of it?" I bit back a sharp retort and forced a polite smile. "Because it's not about the party," I replied calmly. "It's about respect." That answer didn't satisfy everyone, but it didn't need to. What mattered was that the conversation had started. People were talking, not just about me or Karen, but about the kind of community we wanted to live in. Did we want to be ruled by fear and rigid rules? Or did we want to build something better, where individuality and mutual respect mattered more than conformity? Karen, for her part, wasn't taking the challenge lying down. She launched what can only be described as a PR campaign to win back support. Flyers appeared on doorsteps praising her dedication to maintaining property values. Emails flooded inboxes highlighting all the wonderful improvements she brought to the neighborhood. She even organized a small gathering at her house, complete with lemonade and cookies, to rally her allies. But no matter how hard she tried, the cracks kept widening. One evening, as Ryan and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said slowly, "you've really shaken things up around here." "Is that good or bad?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He chuckled. "Good, I think. Maybe great. People are finally standing up for themselves. Even if they don't say it out loud, they're thinking about what you did." His words stayed with me long after the sun dipped below the horizon. He was right. Something had changed. Neighbors who had previously avoided each other started chatting more openly. Conversations at the mailboxes grew longer, friendlier. Someone even organized a casual potluck without consulting the HOA first, a bold move in a neighborhood where every event required Karen's stamp of approval. Then came the turning point. A group of residents approached me one Saturday morning while I was tending to my garden. They looked nervous but determined. "We've been talking," one of them said hesitantly, "and we think it's time for a change. You showed us it's possible to stand up to her. We want to help." I blinked in surprise. "Help with what?" "Taking back the HOA." Another neighbor chimed in. "We're tired of living under her rules. Tired of feeling like we don't have a say in our own homes." Their courage inspired me. Together, we drafted a petition calling for reforms within the HOA. Fairer guidelines, transparent decision-making, and most importantly, leadership that actually listened to its members. Within days, signatures poured in. Even some of Karen's former supporters added their names, clearly realizing the tide had turned. When the next HOA meeting rolled around, the atmosphere was electric. Dozens of residents packed into the community center, armed with copies of the petition and stories of their own frustrations. Karen sat at the front table, looking smaller than ever, her usual confidence replaced by thinly veiled panic. When it was time for her to speak, she stumbled over her words, trying and failing to regain control of the narrative. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to strip Karen of her title and appoint a new leader, one chosen by the community, not self-imposed. As she gathered her things and left the room in stunned silence, I couldn't help but feel a mix of triumph and relief. This wasn't just a victory for me. It was a win for everyone who had ever felt powerless under her rule. And yet, as I looked around the room at the faces of my neighbors, I realized this was only the beginning. Change doesn't happen overnight, especially in places like Willow Ridge. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that maybe, just maybe, we could create a neighborhood where everyone belonged, not because they followed the rules, but because they were valued for who they were. With Karen officially out of the picture, the neighborhood began to breathe again. It was like a weight had been lifted, a collective exhale after years of holding our breath. For so long, we tiptoed around her rules, afraid to speak up or step out of line. But now, without her looming presence, people started coming alive in ways I hadn't expected. The first sign of change came subtly. Someone painted their front door bright yellow, something that would have earned them a violation notice under Karen's watch. Then another neighbor hung a quirky wind chime on their porch, its soft tinkling sound carrying through the air. Slowly but surely, individuality crept back into Willow Ridge. Houses that once looked identical began to reflect the personalities of their owners. Gardens overflowed with wildflowers instead of perfectly trimmed shrubs. Even the mailboxes, once uniform beige rectangles, became little works of art, some painted with bold colors, others adorned with handmade decorations. But it wasn't just about appearances. The energy in the neighborhood shifted too. Conversations grew warmer, more genuine. People lingered longer at the mailboxes, sharing stories and laughter instead of rushing off to avoid Karen's judgmental gaze. Neighbors who had lived side by side for years without ever exchanging more than a polite nod suddenly found themselves chatting over coffee or helping each other with yard work. It was as if the removal of one oppressive force had freed us all to connect in ways we hadn't before. Of course, not everything changed overnight. Old habits die hard, and some residents still clung to the rigid mindset Karen had instilled. A few grumbled about the new lack of order, insisting that property values would plummet if everyone went rogue. But even they seemed less vocal as time went on, perhaps realizing they were outnumbered, or maybe just tired of fighting. One of the biggest changes came during the next community event. Instead of Karen's meticulously planned galas, the new HOA leader, a soft-spoken woman named Lisa, organized a casual potluck picnic in the park. There were no glittery centerpieces or strict seating arrangements, just blankets spread across the grass and plates piled high with homemade dishes. Kids chased each other around while adults laughed and swapped stories. For the first time, it felt less like an obligation and more like, well, a community. As I sat there, watching the sun dip below the trees, I couldn't help but smile. This was what I'd hoped for when I stood my ground against Karen. Not revenge, but renewal. Not destruction, but rebuilding. And yet, part of me wondered, would this last? Or would the old patterns creep back in once the initial excitement wore off? My thoughts were interrupted when Lisa approached me, balancing 2 paper plates loaded with food. "Mind if I join you?" she asked with a warm smile. "Not at all," I replied, scooting over to make room. We ate in comfortable silence for a while before she spoke. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "you really shook things up around here. In a good way." I shrugged, feeling a little embarrassed. I just wanted to protect my space. I didn't mean to start a revolution. She laughed softly. "Maybe not, but sometimes revolutions happen when people least expect them. You gave everyone permission to be themselves, to push back against rules that didn't make sense anymore." Her words stayed with me long after the picnic ended. She was right. It wasn't just about me or my barn. It was about creating a ripple effect, showing others that standing up for yourself could inspire others to do the same. Change doesn't always come from grand gestures or sweeping declarations. Sometimes it starts small with a locked door, a quiet refusal, or simply saying no when everyone expects you to say yes. Over the following weeks, the neighborhood continued to transform. The HOA meetings, once tense and formal, became collaborative discussions where everyone's voice mattered. New guidelines were put in place, not to control, but to guide. Flexibility replaced rigidity. Compassion replaced fear. And then there was my barn. It remained untouched by anyone except me. No glittery banners, no disco balls, no uninvited guests. Just the creaky wooden walls and rusted hinges I'd grown to love. Every time I walked inside, I felt a deep sense of pride, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. Truly mine. As the seasons changed and leaves turned golden, I realized something important. Communities aren't built on rules or regulations. They're built on trust, respect, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Willow Ridge wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But for the first time, it felt like home. Life in Willow Ridge settled into a rhythm I hadn't thought possible just months before. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, no place ever is, but it felt alive in a way it never had under Karen's rule. There was laughter again, real laughter that echoed through the streets without fear of judgment. Neighbors waved to each other not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted to. It was as if we'd rediscovered what it meant to be a community, not a collection of houses bound by rules, but a group of people sharing space and stories. My barn became a symbol of that transformation. Once the center of chaos, it now stood quietly at the edge of my property, weathered and imperfect, yet full of meaning. Occasionally, I'd host small gatherings there. Nothing flashy, just simple get-togethers with friends who brought chairs and snacks. We'd sit around, drink coffee or cider, and talk about everything from gardening tips to life lessons. Each time, someone would joke about locking the doors at midnight, and we'd all laugh, remembering how one bold act had changed everything. Karen, unsurprisingly, didn't stick around long after losing her grip on the HOA. She sold her house within weeks, claiming she needed a fresh start. Some said she moved to another subdivision, where rumors suggested she was already trying to take over their homeowners association. Good luck to them, I thought. Maybe she'd learn something this time, or maybe she'd find herself facing another rebellion. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. Without Karen looming over us, the new leadership brought balance to the neighborhood. Lisa, our HOA president, encouraged creativity instead of conformity. She introduced flexible guidelines that allowed for personal expression while still maintaining harmony. Want to paint your mailbox purple? Go ahead, as long as it doesn't block the sidewalk. Thinking of planting sunflowers taller than 6 feet? Fine by us. The focus shifted from control to collaboration, and it made all the difference. Ryan noticed the change too. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the twilight, he turned to me with a grin. "You know what," he said, "I think you're kind of a legend around here." "Don't be ridiculous," I replied, though I couldn't hide my smile. "No, seriously," he insisted. "People look at you differently now, like you're some kind of superhero." I laughed, shaking my head. If standing up for yourself makes me a superhero, then sure, sign me up. But deep down, I knew what he meant. Before the barn incident, I'd been just another face in the crowd, content to blend in and avoid conflict. Now I realized the power of speaking up, not just for myself, but for others too. By refusing to let Karen walk all over me, I'd given permission to everyone else to do the same. And that ripple effect, the courage to question authority, to demand fairness, to embrace individuality, was worth more than any rulebook. As the seasons rolled on, Willow Ridge continued to evolve. New families moved in, bringing fresh energy and ideas. Old traditions merged with new ones, creating something uniquely ours. During the holidays, someone organized a neighborhood light display contest. Not mandatory, of course, but fun. Houses twinkled with colorful lights, some extravagant, others simple, but all reflecting the spirit of their owners. Even the kids joined in, stringing paper lanterns between trees and decorating curbside mailboxes with handmade ornaments. Looking back, I realized the barn party debacle taught me something profound. Boundaries matter. Not just physical ones, like fences or locked doors, but emotional ones too. Saying no isn't easy. It can feel selfish, confrontational, even risky. But sometimes saying no is the bravest thing you can do. It protects your space, your values, and ultimately, your peace of mind. Every now and then, I'll walk past the barn and pause, running my fingers along its rough wooden beams. It's still just a barn, creaky, dusty, and far from perfect. But to me, it represents resilience, a reminder that standing your ground doesn't mean shutting others out. It means holding firm to who you are and what you believe in. That night I locked the doors at midnight. I didn't just reclaim my property. I reclaimed my voice. And in doing so, I helped Willow Ridge find its own.